we feel about zealots? We don't usually love the zealot, especially not the religious zealot. And yet this week's Torah portion is named after a zealot. It's named after Pinchas. And not only is Pinchas a zealot, but we learn in this week's Torah portion that God rewards Pinchas with a covenant, with a brit shalom, a covenant of peace. Why does God reward the zealot? We have to go back to last week's Torah portion, and there we learn that an Israelite named Zimri and a Midianite woman named Cosbi decided to have sex in public in front of the Mishkan, the sacred tabernacle. Pinchas was the leader of the Levitical guards, and he is so incensed at this flagrant act that he impales both Zimri and Cosbi with a sword. And so aren't we then a bit surprised to read at the beginning of this week's Torah portion that Pinchas's act of zealotry is rewarded with this covenant of peace for impaling these two? Now, I don't think that most of us are all that comfortable with this idea, saying that Pinchas's act of zealotry, however terrible the crime that was being committed and he was responding to, ought to be rewarded with a brit shalom, a covenant of peace. Because wouldn't this tend to imply that all zealots are given license to act impulsively in God's name? So let's try reading the story slightly differently, really as a story of archetypes rather than the more literal story of Pinchas acting against a zealot or acting as a zealot. As an archetypal figure, the plague that Pinchas is trying to end is the plague of powerlessness. While this flagrant sin is being committed in front of the Mishkan, in front of the tabernacle, there's no one among the Israelites who is doing anything. They seem to be ignoring what's going on, pretending nothing is happening, or not really caring very much. And so this plague is a plague of indecision around this flagrant act that is going on in their midst. And so acting deliberately in the name of our highest aspirations and values is an act, it can be seen as an act of righteous zeal, the ability to act decisively, not to give justification to impaling people on swords, but sometimes the zealot is acting with a kind of decisiveness that others around are not willing to act with. And that passivity is part of the plague that perhaps Pinchas is responding to. And so here, Pinchas can be seen not literally, again, not giving justification to its act, but from an archetypal point of view, as being willing to confront this plague of helplessness, of ambivalence and complicity, and by acting with the fullness of his being, and in this way, contributing to a greater restoration of shleimut, of wholeness within the community. Shleimut, wholeness, is the same root as shalom, of peace. Sometimes zealotry and zeal can be the exact counterbalance we need to indecision and inaction. And we learn that in this week's Torah portion that right after this act of zealotry, God commands the Israelites to take a census. And perhaps this, as my teacher, Rabbi Shefa Gold, suggests, is a reminder that each one of us has to locate and integrate this powerful archetypal energy within the context of the whole community, within the context of the whole. Because when zealotry is split off from the community as a whole, the zealot can become a dangerous and destabilizing force and harm the well-being of the community. But when a focused and directed power can emerge and be acknowledged, our zeal can hopefully be integrated into the whole. And here, when zealotry is combined with compassion and kindness, not violence, as Pinchas does, it can be turned into a source of healing and wholeness rather than a source of destruction and harm. So what we learn from Pinchas perhaps is that zealotry has as its core a zeal for doing something with the fullness of our being. May we be given that blessing of having our zeal be for righteousness and for goodness, to bring healing to the communities of which we are a part. Wish all of you a wonderful week and a wonderful 4th of July.